So all of the Jews, they face Jesus and they say to him, you have done something very wrong and we are now going to get you in trouble. Now, do you notice what they've done to his hands, at the back of his hands? What have they done to Jesus?
They tied him up.
They tied him, yeah, they bound him. They bound him and they have said, we are accusing you of blasphemy, which means you claim to be the Son of God. That's not a good thing, they say. We're going to get you in trouble for that. But they know they can't just go out and kill Jesus themselves because they're not in charge of the country anymore. They have to go to the Romans. So they take him to Pilate and they say to Pilate, shall we see Pilate over here? So they take him all bound up there. They take him to see the Roman governor. There he is sitting on his very special chair. And they say to him, we want you to arrest Jesus and to crucify him, to put him to death. And the Jews say to Pilate, look, this man claims to be the king of the Jews. That's a bad thing, isn't it? Because they're saying Caesar is the king, and they know that if they say that somebody's trying to be king, then Pilate will say, well, hang on, there's no other king. You can't start creating new kings. Pilate asks Jesus, he says, well, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, well, yes, it's as you say. I am the king of the Jews, but it's not a kingdom that's going to be in this world. Where's his kingdom going to be?
In heaven.
In heaven, Grace, yeah. He says, my kingdom is going to be in heaven. So Pilate thinks, well, that's nothing to do with our country. He says, that's no problem. And so he says to the Jewish people, he says, look, I've talked to him. I don't think there's anything wrong with this at all. He's done nothing that's worthy of me punishing him. And so the Jews say to Pilate, you know, this man has been stirring up trouble throughout our whole country, right from Galilee all the way to Jerusalem. Now, of course, Galilee is where Jesus came from. Galilee, the Sea of Galilee and the towns around Galilee, that's where Jesus lived. And as soon as Pilate hears that Jesus is from Galilee, he thinks, oh, I can get out of this problem. I don't have to sort this out because I know there's a king who's in charge of Galilee. Anybody know what the king's name was? Begins with H.
Henry?
Herod, Grace, yeah. Now, Herod wasn't interested in anything to do with Jesus' teachings. He didn't care if he was the Messiah, but what he was interested in was the fact that Jesus could do miracles. And so he says to Jesus, I want to see a miracle. Well, Jesus doesn't say anything to this man. He just keeps quiet. He doesn't say a word. And so after a while, Herod gets fed up with this. He says, well, this is boring. The man isn't saying anything. The man isn't doing me a miracle. He's pretty unimpressed with Jesus. He's pretty bored. So he says, oh, I've had enough of this. Let's send him back to Pilate. Pilate told the Jews, he says, look, I don't agree with you. This man has done nothing worthy of death. I've interviewed him. Pilate has interviewed him. Nobody can say anything that he's done. That means that he should be in trouble. He's done nothing wrong. And the Jews say, well, no, that's not right. This isn't right. We want this man crucified because he's stirring up trouble. So Pilate, having just said that Jesus is innocent, he says, well, okay, this is what I'll do for you. I'll have him whipped and then I'll release him. Now, is it right, do you think, that they're going to whip a man they've just found innocent? No, if you've said someone's innocent, if you've said that they haven't done anything wrong, you shouldn't then punish them. So straight away we start to see that Pilate isn't as good a governor as he ought to be. He says, now look, here's another idea. He says, every year at the feast of the Passover, I'm allowed to release one person to you. He says, I can release Jesus to you. And he thinks, who should I also offer? What should be the other choice? He says, I know, I'll pick somebody that nobody would ever choose. Who does he pick, Henry?
Barabbas.
Barabbas. He says, let's bring Barabbas out. Now, Barabbas is also in prison because he's been arrested for murder and for thieving and for starting riots. So he really has done lots of things wrong. And so Pilate says to the crowd and the Jews and all the crowd there, he says, who shall I release to you? Shall I release Barabbas or shall I release Jesus? And I think Pilate is seeing this as a convenient way of being able to release Jesus. Who did the crowd ask for?
Barabbas.
Barabbas. They say, release Barabbas. He says, release Barabbas? He says, what shall I do with Jesus then? And what did the crowd cry out? Donna.
Kill him.
Kill him, crucify him. And so Barabbas is released. Somebody comes up to Pilate who has had a dream. Who do you think this lady might be? Who's that lady?
His wife?
His wife, Emily, yeah. Pilate's wife comes up to him and says, have nothing to do with that righteous man, talking about Jesus, because I have suffered greatly in a dream because of him. She's been having nightmares. God's been really messing with her head because she knows that Jesus has done nothing wrong. Well, he calls for a big bowl of water. Okay, what's he going to do with the water, do you think? What's he going to do?
I think he's going to pour it on his head.
He's not going to pour it on his head. It would be funny if he did that. But he's not going to pour it on his head. What do you think he's going to do? Ernie?
Splash it on Jesus.
Not going to splash it on Jesus. Donna?
He's going to drink it.
He's not going to drink it. He's going to wash his hands. Because when the Romans would wash their hands, it was like them saying, this isn't my, I'm not taking responsibility. It's like, oh, I feel like I've got dirty hands dealing with this. I'm going to wash my hands. It's someone else's problems. And then all the Pharisees, they say, we'll take responsibility. Let his blood be on our heads. We'll take responsibility for this. And Pilate decides he's not going to deal with it. And he agrees to have Jesus whipped, and then he gives the order that Jesus should be taken out and crucified. Now, very quickly, just to close, did Herod do the right thing?
No.
No.
Did Pilate do the right thing?
No.
Did the Jewish people do the right thing?
No.
Bad things are going on here. It's a lot of criminal activity. A lot of sins are being committed to make sure that Jesus is going to get killed. But if you think about it, because Jesus never did one thing wrong, there has to be something wrong about this. Otherwise, he'd never go to the cross. And isn't it amazing that somehow God takes all of these wicked actions from Pilate, from the Jewish people, and from Herod, and he somehow arranges it all that Jesus goes to the cross. Let me just read you one verse. Now remember, Peter hasn't always understood what's going on. But later on in the book of Acts, some days later, Peter, it's like he's finally understood. And he says this to a big crowd of people. He says, indeed, Herod and Pontius Pilate met together with the Gentiles and the people of Israel in this city to conspire against, that means to make an evil plot, against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed. They did what your power and will had decided beforehand should happen. That very simply means that God arranged all these things. He didn't make Pilate evil, he didn't make the Jews evil, he didn't make Herod evil, but he knew that they had bad things in their heart, and God took those things, all those bad things, to send Jesus to the cross so that good things might come out of it. If Jesus hadn't gone to the cross, none of us would be saved. So isn't it amazing that God can take some evil and turn it into something good?